All right, welcome to another edition of Radio InfoSide. Tonight, the topic is weather modification, and we're going to be talking about all the crazy stuff, HARP, maybe chemtrails, cloud seeding, using lightning as a weapon, HARP causing earthquakes, alien creatures possibly raining down in chemtrails. So we're going to have some pretty crazy stuff that we're going to talk about tonight. And Michigan Bob, you were the one who initially floated this idea. So actually, before we do that, let's do the boilerplate stuff. If you want to join in the discussion, you can go to talkshoe.com. Just look up Radio InfoSide. Tonight's call-in number is 724. Actually, rather than do that, just go to either that TalkShoe and look up Radio InfoSide, or go to radioinfoside.com/shows/current, and it's got the phone information there. InfoSide spelled INFOCYDE. You can also listen to past episodes. We got kind of a sad website that I'm working on, but by the end of this week, all the past shows should be on it, and you can go to radioinfoside.com to listen to them there. So, Michigan Bob, where to begin with this subject of weather modification? What do you think?
Wherever you want to, I guess.
Okay. Basically, there's all sorts of conspiracy theories floating around out there that may be true, may not be true. That we'll get into some of them tonight. But kind of the initial idea I was thinking of is just do a little bit of talk about, you tell people, oh, yeah, the government can manipulate the weather, and they go, no, they can't. So I figured maybe we'd take a baby step and talk about acknowledged forms that the weather is being manipulated. Did you do any? I know you were going for the heavy stuff, and I'll give you the lead on talking about all that stuff once we get into it. Did you do any stuff on like cloud seeding research?
Yeah, I've looked at it before, and I've heard of it before, where I do believe they spray. I can't think what they spray into clouds. Not iron.
Silver iodide, dry ice,
thank you.
And
yeah.
sometimes salt. Yeah.
Yeah, and it actually is supposed to create clouds or to make clouds bigger and stuff like that.
Yeah, it actually will make clouds rain. I guess airports, I didn't know this, will actually use it a lot, because if they think hail's coming in, they'll have a plane fly up and seed the clouds to try to disperse all that hail before it gets to the airport.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't know that until today too. But anyway, so this cloud seeding stuff, is this mythology, or is it pretty much acknowledged and used? This is a baby question for you.
As far as I know, it's pretty much acknowledged and used, and I think not everybody, but I've seen it where people have acknowledged that they are doing it, and it's a widely practiced procedure.
Yeah, China used it during the Olympics. I guess they wanted it to rain because the rain also cuts down on the smog. Interestingly enough, there was some proposals about using cloud seeding as a way to deal with hurricanes too, because you have all this moisture coming in, and you just dump this aluminum iodine or dry ice or whatever on the clouds and get them to just dump all that rain out before it gets really really bad as far as a hurricane. Did you hear anything about that?
I've heard of it on the conspiracy theory side of it. I don't know if they've actually ever done it, but I've heard of people saying that was a proposal.
Okay. What do you think that the military would have any interest in controlling the weather, and if so, like what types of things would they do with it?
I think that the military would definitely be interested in controlling the weather, because if you control the weather, you could basically do covert warfare basically on another country. If you could change the weather in a country, that could lead to basically famine or droughts or anything like that, and you could basically starve a country out, and you wouldn't have to launch any bombs.
Yeah, that's definitely on a bigger scale. on a tactical scale, like if you maybe make it rain a lot in a certain area, that might slow troops down. Or if it's going to rain on your troops and slow them down, maybe you seed the clouds while they're coming in before they get to your troops and have them rain out. So by the time it gets to your troops, it doesn't really affect them too much as far as their mobility is concerned. So those are two tactical uses, and then you're talking about a strategic use where you're basically going to war against another country. Did you find any possible examples of that in while you're looking at all this stuff?
Well, if you want to get into the bigger stuff, there is a theory that Russia did it in 1976, I think it was. They built a ultra low frequency antenna that they basically aimed at the United States, and it caused, well, the speculative people said that it caused blackouts and interference with telephones and communication lines and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'd heard about it. They called it the Russian woodpecker
because of the noise that it heard on the ham radio listeners could hear, like the clicking, and they called it the Russian woodpecker.
Yeah, and I think the evidence of it is pretty much undeniable, and they actually did it off and on up until like 89, I think, is the last time they detected the signal.
The last time that they acknowledged that they heard the signal was in 1989, which is kind of when Russia kind of fell from superpower status.
So you think that they were actually waging weather warfare on us?
I would tend to believe they were trying to do something, and I mean, ever since the beginning of time, I think man's has dreamed about controlling the weather, and even people like Tesla, had a basic idea and theories of how to do it.
We should do a show on Tesla because that guy's just, I don't know, I haven't researched him too much, but if like even half of what they say about that guy is true, he was like this uber genius that was like light years ahead of everybody on electromagnetics and a bunch of other stuff. You know much about him?
Yeah. We've done in high school. We did a couple research papers or whatever you want to say on him, and I've done individual research on him. And yeah, he was almost a mad scientist, I guess you'd say. He was a brilliant person, and unfortunately, for a long time, after his death, he kind of went into obscurity. No one really talked about him, and everybody kind of held up Edison as the father of electricity and everything else, where it was Tesla who came up with the alternating current and, basics of what we use electricity nowadays. Obviously, some of his ideas were weren't very good, but he was a very brilliant person.
Yeah, and like even the ones that supposedly aren't very good might someday in the future be, I'm sure not everything he's tossing out there was on, but from what little stuff, I've heard some really bizarre stuff about Tesla coils and how people use them as like a free energy machine. But the only problem is if you use them like that, it opens like dimensional rifts and things start coming through. I mean,
I haven't heard the dimension ripping part, but yeah, one of his ideas was basically free electricity. That was his big thing, was he wanted everybody to be able to have free electricity, and unfortunately he was shut down and dismissed basically. So
yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting to explore him some more, so we might have to research him. Circling back to the woodpecker thing, did you hear the theory about how possibly it was the Russians trying to create an early warning system?
No.
Well, the theory with that, and the only reason I found it out is because real quick before I did the show, somebody on Twitter, Delete the Elite, sent me a link to a History Channel weather modification show. So it's kind of like staying at a Holiday Inn Express. I learned a couple of things that I didn't know. So one of the things that project or the Russian woodpecker thing is they were thinking that somehow the Russians were charging the ionosphere above the United States and could somehow detect ripples if things moved through it. And so essentially what it was they were creating this giant detection layer over the United States, that if we launched any ballistic missiles at them, they would be able to detect it. That's one theory beyond the weather warfare theory, and it could be a combination of the two. And the reason I bring that up is because we'll go into a conspiracy theory later about HARP. But yeah, that was pretty interesting. You didn't hear anything about that, though?
No, I didn't catch that part. I like I said, I heard more the weather control aspect, but I mean, it would make sense if they can monitor it. If something goes through the atmosphere like a missile, yeah, if they could tell, they'd give them a couple extra minutes, I guess.
Yeah, before they're blown off the. So tell me about the weather modification aspects of what maybe the Russians were doing.
Well, like I said, Tesla had an idea. If you use ultra low frequency radio waves, basically, which almost every electronic gives off, and most of it is safe for humans. We can't really detect it. But if you charge the ionosphere with it, if you can beam it up to the ionosphere, it basically, like a balloon, it pushed the ionosphere up into outer space, basically, which would create a vacuum underneath it where the atmosphere the lower layers of the atmosphere would rush in to fill that void, and it would basically cause the atmosphere to suck up, which would basically move, in America's case, it moved the jet stream. And there's cases where people think it's been used to do that and cause droughts. And like I said, droughts and famines, and it changed the weather in America.
So was there a huge drought during this time where they were sending the signal to us?
The only case that I heard of happening was, I think, in the 80s, where the jet stream actually switched directions. And to this day, they don't know why it did that, or it's never done it since. But instead of going, I do believe it goes west to east. I want to say 86 or 85, somewhere in there, it actually switched directions or moved down more. So and basically, if people don't know what the jet stream is, it's basically what controls the weather around the world. It's responsible for moving weather systems and moving millions and trillions of gallons of water in the air around the world, and that's what basically makes all the weather systems in the whole world, is the jet stream that shoots around the world. But it caused a drought in Texas and Florida, I think it did, and in California, I do believe.
That's what I read too, and I heard it was particularly bad in California. It was one of the worst droughts that they've had in a while. And talking about the jet stream, so essentially you're saying that they can create these like almost bubbles of high pressure, and the jet stream will either flow north or south of it. So it's a way that they can control the jet stream flowing. Is that kind of?
Yeah, it would basically it would almost be like creating a dam in a river. The water's gonna. You can't stop the water from moving, but you can deflect it, basically. So if they put a high-pressure system in front of it, it's going to go around it, or vice versa. It'd go, one way or the other. So you could direct where to go, where the jet stream would go, and therefore you could basically control the weather. You could make that jet stream go south, north, and totally just change what Mother Nature's doing.
So Did you come across any information on like how many? Well, let's circle back a little bit. The original HARP in the U.S., which I think was built, I didn't write the date down, which I should have, in the 80s, had 180 antennas that were each 70 feet tall in Alaska that could project radio waves into one spot in the atmosphere, and it was a joint U.S. Air Force program. And your average high-powered radio station in the United States operates at 50,000 kilowatts or watts. I didn't write that down. But the HARP has the potential, at least the first station, to beam 3.6 million watts, supposedly. I'm sure the real number is classified. So if they can beam essentially what, almost 300 times what your average radio station beams at a cloud, and supposedly it heats up the ionosphere. That's pretty telling that they might be able to create the bubbles you're talking about. What do you think about that? And do you have any more details on that?
Yeah, I think it was built in '82. I think is when the United States started building. I might be wrong about the date too, but I think it was 1982 is when they started. But and it's not like a big area. That station that you're talking about in Alaska, I think the dimensions were something like 2 miles by I can't think of how small it was, but it's just a tiny spot when you think about how big the atmosphere is. It's not a huge spot. They're just heating up one small spot, but it's enough to raise it. Like I said, it heats it up, which changes the electrical, electrons, and it charges them and it makes them raise up. So, like I said, it create that bubble, and inadvertently it would move the jet stream.
And this comes from the horse's mouth, so to speak. I know for a fact that the original HARP concept, I'm not sure if it's this base or not, but the original concept is that if there was a nuclear war, the idea was that you bounce radio signals off the ionosphere so that you can do over the horizon communication, because I guess radios can only go so far. So it's a way you can like bounce a signal up off the sky and then bounce it back down, so you can communicate a lot further. And then I'm wondering if the U.S. was working on that, and the Russians and others were working on it, and they started noticing that heating property, and that they could maybe mess with the weather like that. Any comments on that?
Well, like Nikola Tesla had the idea back in the 1800s. He said you could control the weather by doing that. I mean, so it was a known theory back, 100 years ago. Well, 100 plus years.
Yeah, I didn't know that. So right now the U.S. has. Do you know how many HARP sites that we have?
I think there was at least 3 that I saw. I might be wrong in my numbers, but I thought there was 3.
Yeah, that's what I got too. That we had 2 in Alaska, 1 in Puerto Rico. I guess the original one I just saw on Twitter in the last week, that the original station I guess might be shut down, but they have 2 others in Alaska and 1 in Puerto Rico. And the Europeans have 1 admitted in Norway. Russia has another one that's operating. I'm not sure if it was the same one. And supposedly one person speculated that between all the nations around the earth, there could be as many as 20 stations. Have you heard anything about that?
Yeah, that pretty much matches what I've heard. I've heard from somebody who's into conspiracy theories that the original one was basically was the Bermuda Triangle, and it was right dead center where the Bermuda Triangle is, and he was saying that that's what caused a lot of the planes to crash and burn, and all the mysterious weather patterns in the Bermuda Triangle is when they first started it up.
Huh. That I didn't hear. That's very interesting.
Again, I don't know if that's true or not. He said he did his research, and I obviously, I just kind of took him at his word. I have never seen anything to prove that. So.
Oh, that's another avenue of research that we can go on. But what do you think that they could do with the weather if they do have? Let's go conspiracy theory here a little bit. Let's say that these 20 HARP stations have the possibility of working in tandem. What would that mean for the world? Would that mean that whoever controls those HARP stations, this is again baby question I guess, would they have power to literally control the weather?
Absolutely. If the theory holds true and that's what the HARP can do, then absolutely they can definitely control the weather, not only over one country but worldwide.
So that's a frightening concept that we'll explore a little bit. But if these stations are working in tandem, the jet stream isn't just in the U.S. like you were saying; it's global. So it can be controlled in all areas of the globe, possibly with these 5 to 20 stations that are in existence. So if all these theories are true, that's kind of a scary thought. Any comments there?
Yeah, it's a very scary thought.
So what about, have you heard anything about HARP and earthquakes?
A little bit, but I don't think you've said what actually HARP stands for.
Okay, go ahead and throw that out there.
Oh, I was going to let you do it because I just butcher their words.
I think it stands for, I found 2 acronyms, High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program or High Altitude Auroral Research Program, one of the two. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and, there could be other classified names that it's operating under now, but that original station, that's what it was operating as. So good point, yeah, we didn't bring that up. So tell me about earthquakes and HARP. What do you know?
From what I understand, that again, basic knowledge that I have of it, when the atmosphere gets basically sucked into that bubble, when it goes up, it can actually create so much force sucking up that it can move the the earth plates underneath it, and it can actually cause shifting in it and create earthquakes.
Now, you talked about that might explain some of the strange sounds people are hearing.
Yeah, there's people hear weird. I can't think of what my brain just went blank. What they call it?
Trumpet
ground
type sounds.
Yeah, like ground thumping and stuff like that. It's in basically if you look it up, when people report this, it's usually in a circle pattern, and it happens that a lot of it is right before an earthquake happens. They'll hear thumping or trumpets or something. They describe it as a noise that it's not a normal noise. And usually, like I said, people will report this, and it usually makes almost like a circle pattern. And it's, like I said, it's usually accompanied by an earthquake of different magnitudes. Obviously, smaller ones usually, nothing like a 7.0 or anything like that. Usually they're smaller earthquakes.
And it's interesting that they're in a circular pattern, because that would kind of map with the idea of those extremely low frequency waves from HARP stations being beamed into an area that superheats. It would be circular as it rises up. So that's very interesting. Have you heard anything about HARP signals being bounced off the ionosphere and back into the Earth, and that possibly causing earthquakes as well?
Yeah, that was the other theory I also heard, that basically they can beam it up and it can bounce back and basically do the same thing that would do in the clouds underground, basically, and cause an earthquake doing it that way too.
Yeah, I watched again that one video that the Delete the Elite sent me. It talked about one guy who used, I guess they use kind of ELF signals to search for oil and gas, and he went out and tried to do some exploration for a energy company in an area where there was a lot of known earthquakes, and he said the second they started sending the waves down, they had an earthquake, and it kind of scared him, and it got him kind of thinking that maybe that's kind of what HARP's doing as well. You heard any stories along that line?
Yeah, same thing. Pretty much the same story. I don't know what program is it on?
What was it? I think it was the History's Channel, Weather Warfare or something like that. It's in the notes here.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's probably the same one that I saw then, because I heard pretty much the same story.
So tell me more about HARP. Any other details?
Well, other than it's very scary to think that not only is man capable of controlling weather, but big government or tyrannical governments or anything like that, people can use this to control huge populations, because with the weather, like I said, you can control food, and with food you can control the masses. And again, like you said, with earthquakes and with floods and I mean, you can the power behind it is just amazing to think that we could be capable of controlling it. And as great as that would sound, on the good side, you could say, oh, one area doesn't have any rain, so we can make it rain there. Well, on the other side, you could say, hey, we could make it not rain somewhere else.
Yep, and by default, if you cause it to rain in one area, you might be robbing the moisture from another area. You might be robbing Peter to pay Paul, and that brings in this whole ethical question where, rich countries that can afford these HARP technologies stealing weather from poorer countries, which would result in them being even poorer. Any comments there?
Exactly. I mean, again, it's as awesome as it sounds, that we can control weather. It's a scary thing to think about, who's actually doing it, because man is fallible, man is evil, basically, and we are only going to use it for our own greedy needs, whoever is controlling the button that does it.
Very well said. Now, let's say they wanted to keep the fact that HARP was the cause of, say, flooding and some earthquakes and some changing of the jet stream. If they didn't want to blame it on HARP, what would they maybe blame it on?
My first guess would be man-made global warming.
I would guess the same. Do you think maybe there could even be a covert effort in using these technologies to promote the fact that global warming is happening?
Absolutely. Again, if they could make it global. They could make it warmer in certain spots and say, well, that it's raised. I can't remember the last number I heard, but the Earth's temperature's raised 2 degrees in 20 years or something like that, and they could say, well, that's global warming, and we need to tax everything that can contribute to global warming, and we need to tell you can't use certain products because of global warming, and so on and so forth.
And let's say like certain powerful people were kind of in on the scheme, and they went down and bought, like in a carbon trading scheme, they went down to South America and bought a bunch of forests that are considered for tax purposes carbon sinks. So they just buy a bunch of land at dirt cheap prices and then turn around and sell it to corporations to, because they have carbon credits because their land's absorbing carbon rather than producing it. So they become instant millionaires or billionaires off of this if the carbon tax scheme gets put in. Any thoughts there or other ways that...
I couldn't see anybody doing that. I mean, that would be unethical.
I hate to say it, but the Bush family, I kind of like Bush sometimes, and then I read more about them, and then I don't. But they bought tons of acreage down there. I think Al Gore and his buddies have been buying up these sinks as they, one hand's buying this up, so they're going to make tons of money, and the other hand's promoting it and trying to force governments to adopt the stuff. We'll explore that more here towards the end. Chemtrails, Michigan Bob, what are they, and do they play into any of this stuff, in your opinion?
Well, first off, chemtrails are basically the contrails that many people believe the planes are leaving behind them. Normally, a contrail would be the exhaust in the air, the water vapor from the combustion of the jet engines at higher altitudes will freeze and basically make clouds. And normally, under normal circumstances, they should dissipate. I can't remember the exact number, but I think it was like 5 minutes or something like that. They should dissipate. But in the last 10, 12 years, people started noticing that these contrails that planes are leaving, not only are they not dissipating, and they stay a lot longer, that they actually form clouds. And you'll see long streaks of clouds forming after the planes have long gone by. And in some cases, above major cities, you actually see grid patterns of these contrails, which, again, people call them chemtrails because a lot of people believe that there are chemicals inside of it to either create clouds to combat global warming or for other purposes.
So, do you have any personal observations with chemtrails or grid patterns or anything like that?
I do. I've definitely noticed that once I've got aware of chemtrails. Once I heard about them, I started looking, and on different days you'll notice that some contrails they're there and they dissipate. Sometimes, most of the times, they'll only stay 2-3 lengths of the plane's body back from the plane, and they just disappear. On other days, you'll actually see long streaks of these contrails in the sky, and like I said, they'll actually start to form clouds. And I've talked to people. I'll say, hey, look at that, look at that contrail. Isn't that kind of weird? And people just kind of brush it off, say, oh, that's always been like that. And you ask them, hey, you remember that 10, 12, 15 years ago? Do you remember them staying like that? And they'll stop and think, well, no, I don't remember that. And if you go back and if you the big thing I saw, if you go into pictures of just old pictures that happen to catch planes in the background, none of them have contrails in the sky. They don't exist. They're not there because they dissipated. Whereas nowadays, if you look up in the sky, you just see long streaks of clouds.
Have you noticed the grid pattern?
Yep, I've definitely noticed grid patterns. Again, over it seems to be, again, I actually live in a weird spot where I'm almost in between two major airports. So we actually see lots of planes going over our area. And you see a lot of the grid patterns over us.
It's very interesting because I started looking at stuff too, and I was in the Phoenix area for a while. And I noticed, like, one time I got up really early in the morning. For me, it was, for other people, probably not that early, but it was like 7. And I get up, and there's just full-on grids being formed. I'm like, wow, there's a lot of air traffic at 7 a.m. And then, like you said, they formed clouds. They didn't dissipate. It just kind of created this general white layer, almost like a high fog that cut down the light quite a bit, like a partially cloudy day or something. And what was really bizarre to me is I looked at all this stuff and I started paying attention to it, and some days the skies would just be full of these contrails or chemtrails, if you want to call them. And then the next day, even though the atmospheric conditions were almost exactly the same as the day before, the sky would be pristine, clear. It's like, oh, there's no air traffic today, I guess. It just really bizarre, and I didn't really know what to make of it. And but it seems like there's something to this. What do you think?
I agree, and I think the first time I remember hearing about chemtrails was after 9/11 happened, when all the airports were shut down for like the 2-3 days or a week, however long they were shut down. People started noticing, hey, there's no contrails in the sky, obviously because there's no planes. And people, I think, started realizing and then that, hey, why are there these contrails behind these planes now? I don't remember that being that way a couple years ago. And so it seems, that's when I first heard about it was around that time. And like I said, I started looking it up, and if you Google it, I mean, you'll get all sorts of crazy pictures, and a lot of them are of the grid patterns, and there's a couple from outer space looking down where, there's just parts of the United States that are just covered with these basically grid patterns of clouds that are not natural formed clouds.
Yeah, I think some of the really interesting ones are like I've seen a couple pictures where it'll be like out in the ocean, and there's just all these contrails just in front of like these clouds moving in. There'll be like 50 lines flashing in front of like a weather pattern that's building up way out in the middle of the ocean. And, today in this day and age, it's easy to Photoshop that stuff. But if that stuff's real, which I think some of these pictures are, it's pretty telling. How do you think maybe this stuff plays in with HAARP? Any theories
Again,
there?
If they can create clouds, if they're trying to control the weather, that could definitely go into it. But other than actually using the chemicals, I'm not sure what chemicals, if any, they're using to create these clouds. But you could definitely if you're putting certain chemicals in the air, I'm sure there's a whole range of possibilities of things you could do to weather, but definitely creating clouds and changing the weather fits right in with the HARP project.
Yeah, and I actually didn't put this in the notes, and I just remembered seeing this. There was one conspiracy out there that I saw where weather stations were almost acting like little mini HARP bases, where with chemtrails, I guess what have you heard about any of the type of like heavy metals that they're putting in chemtrails?
The big one I do believe is aluminum, and there's something else. I can't think of it though.
There's all sorts of stuff, yeah.
The basic, from what I understand, there was an actual project that the scientists came up with back in the late 90s, where they basically said if we spray aluminum into the sky in the smallest particle possible, it has the property to reflect X amount of sunlight, basically lowering the amount of sunlight coming in. It reflects it back out in outer space, and therefore lowering the amount of UV light coming through, and lowering the temperature, and basically, counteracting global warming, basically. And there was an actual, like I said, it was a known scientist that came up with this idea, and it just kind of, everybody kind of just said, oh, that's great, and kind of swept it under the rug, and it kind of became quiet. And then all of a sudden now you're seeing these chemtrails.
It's like they announced kind of what they were already doing. But what's interesting is, according to the HARP stuff that I saw, they can actually heat up if there's a bunch of aluminum and barium, like especially barium, I guess, is one of the heavy metals in there. That's extremely electrical conducing, I guess. So they can essentially almost use chemtrails the same way that they would use the ionosphere, where they can heat them up and raise temperatures and maybe affect weather. Again, I didn't even think about this as I was writing the notes, but that one conspiracy I saw, where I guess a lot of people are taking pictures of Weather Underground and in telecast and stuff, where the weather stations are like, these weird patterns keep showing up, and it's almost like the little weather stations are using high-powered radar to act almost like little mini HARP stations. Kind of weird. Any comments there?
Again, there's again, if you go to chemtrails, and I can't think of the main video. Is it what in the world are they spraying?
Yeah, that's it. Excellent video.
And there's one on there where it's a long documentary basically, but the one is that there's a weather report, and on the radar all of a sudden there's this blip of something in the air, and the guy basically brushes it off, says, oh, those are airplanes or something like that. But what they think that they was picking up was all the heavy metal that was in the atmosphere because of chemtrails, that they sprayed the chemtrail, whatever's in the smoke. The chemical was actually showing up on the radar. It was bouncing the radar signal back off.
Yeah, that was pretty wild. So tell me about. I guess there's two theories about where chemtrails are originating from. One of them is that the Air Force has this secret bomber or tanker fleet, I guess, that they fly around spraying this stuff. And then there's another theory. Do you know anything about those two theories, or what the second one is?
I've heard a little bit about it. I mean, I'll just let you explain it so I don't mess it up.
Yeah. Well, basically, there's the idea that there's this secret fleet, and there very well might be. I watched a recent video where this pilot is flying, and did you see this video? A pilot's flying, and all of a sudden he's got to take evasive action because there's these 3 Air Force tankers that come zooming by that didn't show up on the air traffic control system.
No, I didn't see that.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I kind of ignored it pretty much because I'm more for the second theory. Come on, I know you know it. Tell me what it is about them putting additives in the jet fuel.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I thought it was going to be something bigger and grander or something.
Darker.
Yeah. basically the theory would be that they're putting additives in the fuel that for whatever reason would not get burned up or would get produced when it goes through the jet of the plane and coming out in the exhaust. And there's other things that there's nozzles on the wings and stuff like that. But obviously, if you had nozzles spraying off the plane, there'd be a lot more people involved. A lot more people would know about it. And obviously, if you're doing something covert and secret, you want the least amount of people knowing. So if you would add aluminum or into the jet fuel itself, then it'd be no one would know any difference.
Yeah, supposedly that's the big theory, is that they just decided, well, I think I heard, I don't know if it's in the U.S. or globally, I think it's globally, that they estimate, and again, this number is not a magic number, it varies around on season or at night during the day, but there's something like 44,000 aircraft in the air at any given time, roughly average. So rather than have a tanker force of a covert hidden tanker force of 44,000 tankers, why not just put all this stuff in jet fuel and then have those planes do your work for you?
The only problem with that theory, though, is that it would be doing it all the time and not just on certain days.
Yeah, and that's interesting because it does appear to be just on certain days. Do you agree? Or
yeah, and I've seen it myself. I've seen planes. They'll come out of clouds and there won't be a contrail at all, and then all of a sudden it will start leaving contrail, and then it gets across the sky, and then it will stop leaving contrail again. And I pointed it out to people, and their basic reaction is, oh, well, the atmosphere pressures, the temperature's different, something's going on up there that it's a natural phenomenon, it's just the way the sky is, it's different temperatures. Well, you try to explain that it doesn't work like that. If it's leaving a trail here, it should leave it there too. It's not that big of a difference.
Yeah, I would agree, but unfortunately those arguments you can't, those are going to be hard to argue around.
Yeah.
What is there any other evidence that chemtrails are legit, besides just crazy people like us looking up and getting confused by contrails?
No.
You're wrong. Think about it. Contamination in the soil, stuff like that.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I knew. There is. I think. I want to say it was in California, but it might have been in Arizona. It was one of the two states. I think it was California, though. They did a soil sample, and the amount of aluminum and other chemicals that are in the soil is just outrageous. It's thousands of times more than what it should be or used to be, and there's no reason why that would be there other than it's coming from somewhere. And obviously, laying on top of the earth, it had to drop down on top of it.
Yeah, it was Mount Shasta, and it comes from that one video we were talking about, like what in the world are they spraying? And it was 61,000 parts per billion, or maybe it was million, of aluminum, and I guess government, like in the snow water that was coming off the melt from Mount Shasta. And I guess government act. What's that?
What state was it in?
It was in California. You were right.
Okay, thank you.
And then government action is required at 1,000 parts per million or billion. I think it was million. So essentially you have 61 times the amount of what the government considers possibly being toxic coming off of this mountain all of a sudden. And, there's barium, and like you were saying, there's other stuff. There's barium and strontium and other chemicals. People are finding all sorts of crazy stuff that's apparently being rained down from the sky. Did you encounter any health problems that are caused by aluminum?
Aluminum is well, everything is known in California to cause it, but aluminum it attacks reproductive systems, especially in women. The reproductive system is damaged because of aluminum. And
fertility rates are dropping, huh?
And fertility rates are dropping. And I mean, it's kind of there's a large number of people that are having trouble, and obviously this might be an answer of what's going on.
I think also in that video that they had the guy trying to talk to a senator, and he was or it was Feinstein, and they said something like the one area, the amount of Alzheimer's, which is also possibly caused by aluminum, went up like 200% in like recent history. Have you heard anything about GMO plants and chemtrails?
No.
No? Okay.
No.
That was one of the... Did you?
No.
Oh, okay. I guess some of the new GMO breeds of plants that companies like Monsanto are creating are all of a sudden, for I guess apparently no reason, very resistant to aluminum.
Oh, okay.
You find that interesting?
That's very interesting.
So, kind of talking like what you were talking about earlier is if the soil gets all contaminated, and this is looking kind of way far out there conspiracy-wise, but I guess did you hear anything about, before I get into that? Did you hear anything about pH levels in the soil and around Mount Shasta?
Yeah. Again, I think they I can't remember the exact number, but they were. I want to say they were very, very high. Or was it very, very low? I can't remember.
I can't remember either. I think it might have been that they, like, normally it's like slightly acidic and it was becoming neutral because of the aluminum and stuff. And if it becomes, if it changes too much, then all the plants will die. You'll have deforestation. And it's interesting, in other things I've seen that talks about in other areas, the plants are supposedly not as healthy and starting to die. So that's very interesting. And you brought up earlier about how academics have kind of talked about, well, if there was this scenario where there was global warming and we sprayed stuff in the air, it would be to, bounce UV rays and keep everybody safe. It's almost like, do you think maybe they're already doing it and that guy was just kind of belatedly announcing it?
It could be a couple of things. It could have been, these people actually thought of this idea, like, they didn't think anybody else had thought about it, and they said, hey, this is a great idea, and then come to find out, somebody's already been doing it. Or it could have been, a little preemptive thing that basically, if it comes out, they can say, oh, well, we're doing it to help you. We're doing it to stop global warming,
The fact that you said, I didn't catch this, but you said that the aluminum is causing people to become or affects women's fertility, I find very interesting.
Yeah. Basically, that's my understanding is that aluminum is linked to causing problems, especially in women's reproductive systems. And if you are trying to, I don't know, say you think there's too many people on the earth and you want to limit the amount of people that are on the earth, what's one way to do it? Well, people can't have kids. There's less people on the earth.
Yep. In fact, all this stuff is kind of looking highly useful to a certain group that has a certain ideology that isn't above doing manipulative things to get its way. Wouldn't
Democrats?
You say? Well, who controls the Democrats and probably controls the Republicans too?
Yeah. It's interesting that, like you said, I didn't know about the genetically altered plants. If they, if they know this is going on, and if they are part of it, and all of a sudden they have the only plants that are growing, well, where are we all going to get our plants? Where are we going to get our food? If only these certain plants are now growing for whatever reason.
I mean, they've got us. Once they control the food, and in a larger sense, they already kind of have us, because I think something like only 3% of the population actually grows food in a meaningful way now. So if you can control that 3% of the population, the other 97% is at their mercy unless they get violent and say, hey, we're just going to take your food. But if, like me, I'm essentially, I work on computers, but as far as technology-wise outside of the computers, I'm basically a spear chalker. if you handed me a bunch of cord seeds and said, dude, you've got a year to start growing your own food, otherwise you're going to die, I'm pretty much a dead man. And I think
that the corn seeds.
Yeah, I'd munch on the corn seeds the first day, and then I'd be out of food. So I
Make
think a lot
myself
of
some popcorn and die happy.
So I don't know, pretty crazy stuff. Have you heard anything darker that's in chemtrails? This is kind of a rabbit trail, but it's worth mentioning. Like any stuff that's way out there.
Well, other than I think you said something about aliens at the beginning.
Yep.
I have not heard anything about that.
Well, have you heard of something called Morgellons?
No.
Okay. So one of the darker aspects of this, and this could be in tandem to your standard chemtrail that's dealing with HARP and possibly polluting the soil to make people dependent on the new plant stocks. And again, that's all kind of fringe, but there could also be some additional experimentation going on. People are all of a sudden starting to get these really nasty lesions on their arms and stuff, and these fibers are growing out of these lesions, and people are starting to put these fibers under the microscope, and they're like alive, and they're finding like these weird kind of little microorganisms that are like arthropods and little creatures, and these what the Morgellons are is apparently these little filaments that fall out of the sky and somehow get into your system because they're nanoparticles or whatever, but they've got little things in them, and supposedly there's like I was reading one theory on them is there's insect hormones in them that somehow does something to your genetics that make you basically available as a host to all these other little micro and genetically engineered little critters that are falling out of the sky. As far as all that goes, that's just total fringe conspiracy, but the reality of people actually getting these lesions that have all these weird fibers growing out of them, I guess people have taken some of these lesions and put them in like blood little platters, and they grow like crazy all over the place. It's just really weird stuff. Have you ever heard anything about any of that stuff?
No, I don't think I have.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds really out there, but listeners in Michigan Bob, Google Morgellons. It's Morgellons. And if you start going to the crazy chemtrail sites long enough, you'll start bumping into people who claim to have that. I really don't know what it is. The CDC investigated it, and they denied. They said that the symptoms were real, but as to it being something that was falling out of the sky or nano bots or creatures, they pretty much dismissed that. But if you go out there, there's a lot of sites out there, and again, it could all be crazy people and disinfo that are talking about, with electron microscopes that are zooming in on this stuff, that you can see the fibers moving around. It's pretty crazy. You haven't heard anything on. Yeah, another darker aspect. I would speculate that something's going on. I don't know exactly what, but it's in tandem with. It's not the primary reason. Some people are saying, oh, it's aliens terraforming the Earth, and this is just the initial stage. I don't know, but something's going on. Somebody could be doing some experimenting with. And again, the government has used people unwittingly in experiments for a long time. I don't know if I have
aliens using us for experiments. That's just out there, but the government using us, that's normal. Yeah.
So we'll leave that one alone. But when you research chemtrails, you're going to encounter that. So it's worth mentioning. Let's see. So we talked. Let's get back into the conspiracy component of all this. So we have, if HARP is real, and I think it's absolutely real. What do you think?
Well, the actual HARP program is very real. I mean, the government's it's a known government project. Now, what they're doing with it, that they won't say that they're controlling the weather, but I think that for sure they are.
Yeah. Let me read. Have you ever heard of the Club of Rome?
I think you've mentioned it.
It's kind of like another conspiracy group. We should probably do a show on them. But they were really big as far as getting elites together and talking about the world and how they could shape it. And they were pretty open in the 70s. And this is one of their quotes. The common enemy of humanity is man, and searching for a new enemy to unite us, we come up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. All these dangers are caused by human intervention, like HARP, and it is only through changed attitudes and behavior that they can be overcome. The real enemy then is humanity itself. Um, are, you've probably heard of a lot of elites talking about how there's too many people and it's causing global warming, blah blah blah. Tell me about what you think about all that stuff.
There's a lot of people out there that basically, and it always seems to be the same kind of class of people. It's usually rich, upper society. We know it's best for you because we're smart, we're rich, we have everything we need, and we don't need you. It seems to be the upper class that says that there's just too many people. We're destroying Mother Earth. We're destroying the planet. We're using up all our natural resources. Basically, the same people that I think there's been some people that have gone out and said, we need a plague to destroy a third of the people because there's just too many people on Earth.
So you think that, like, if these type of people, one of them being like the technology, I don't know if it's technology czar, but some of the czars that Obama has had HARP, and these people, if you look at the Club of Rome and various other groups, all seem to be kind of networked together. If they wanted to use global warming as a means to create a monster to control society, like everybody would be afraid, so they have this thing that they can use to shape, just like they steer hurricanes possibly with HARP, they can steer public opinion with global warming. Let's say, global warming wasn't cooperating. It wasn't really global warming wasn't happening. So they could use technologies like HARP to make it appear that climate change and global warming was happening. What do you think about those guys maybe using some of this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, technically it's a win-win because one, you could use, if you could control hurricanes, you could take out masses, a mass amount of people, and then you could turn around and say, hey, it's global warming's fault. You could change how people react and how they live their lives on one side of it, and you can also destroy whole cities or countries or the way people live.
Yeah. So I think, like I was thinking, why all this stuff would happen. Again, the threat of global warming. They're going to try to sell it if they come public with it, like you were saying, that it's for your good. We've been doing it maybe covertly to deflect heat. Interesting, I found a verse in Revelation 16:9. It says, "And men were scorched with great heat and blasphemed the name of God, which hath power over these plagues, and they repented not to give him glory." Without doing a big end times study or anything, it's interesting that, maybe in the end when God's pouring out his judgments, he's saying, okay, you guys wanted the earth to be hot so you can gain control. Well, I'm going to make it real hot for you. What do you think about that? Is it possible?
Yeah, that's definitely possible because he promised that he would not destroy the earth in a flood with water. So, I mean, he definitely destroys the earth in Revelations with fire and plagues.
Yes. I mean, I'm kind of taking that verse a little bit, just kind of grabbing it out of the air, but I thought it was interesting. So, I guess wrapping up, so HARP, like you said, is an official program, and it could be more to it. It does seem like they have the capability to manipulate the weather and control the jet stream. Would you agree there?
I agree.
So we also have a group of elites that are networked throughout most of the Western countries that might be tempted to use this to promote their ends. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that.
Okay, then we have chemtrails, another component of this, which seems fantastical when you first start researching it. You just have a tendency to go, oh, those stupid people, they just don't know what a contrail is. But, contrails don't increase aluminum by, 6,000 times or whatever it was on the ground and change the pH level of soil. Plus, have you ever heard of any whistleblowers coming out and talking about chemtrails, Michigan Bob?
I've seen a couple. There was on that video. I think there was a airplane, a pilot basically that came out and said that he thought there was something going on.
Yeah, supposedly, again, it's all a little bit hearsay, but there's been some pilots that have got drunk that have talked to people and claimed that, they were involved in this. Supposedly Evergreen Air and airlines owned by the CIA is heavily involved in this stuff. Though be careful there. If you start Googling pictures of Evergreen airplanes and chemtrails, you come up with some fake ones that have been doctored that were really like test planes for a new European airline that was being developed with a bunch of tanks in it. And people are going, oh, this is an Evergreen plane with a bunch of tanks. But then there's other planes that do have tanks that look very suspicious. So what's the end game in all this? It's also very suspicious that the food companies that are heavily into genetic engineering are all of a sudden coming out with varietals that seem to grow in soil that has lots of aluminum. Would you agree there too?
That's very interesting. That's one of those coincidences in a link, a chain.
So, would it be wrong to say that maybe all this stuff is to further along the mythology of man being the primary cause of global warming, even though in a sense it's true, man is causing global warming, just not in the way most people think, not by pollution, but by design with technology.
They're causing it to prove that they caused it.
Yeah. What would they politically gain? Let's talk about that maybe a little bit. The average person is convinced of global warming. What kind of solutions are the same group advocating as means of solving global warming?
Obviously, the big ones is where I'm concerned is cars and what cars you drive and what is available to drive. I mean, it seems like you can't buy certain cars anymore because they don't. We got to cut down on our carbon footprint, and obviously that's more of an individual person's perspective. But obviously, large companies, like you said earlier, are going to have to start buying and trading in carbon. I can't think of the
carbon
term,
tax scheme.
Yeah, it's carbon taxing and stuff like that. Like, was it cap and trade or whatever?
Do you think maybe there would be an effort to give up national sovereignty and because these problems affect the whole globe and
Definitely. I mean, if you can give it, if certain countries are using up all the resources, obviously the rest of the world is not going to like that, and they're going to say, hey, the whole world doesn't belong to you. We need to unite and come together and stop this, and that could definitely be a big push towards that.
And do you think also the push to, as that quote from the Club of Rome, the common enemy of humanity is man, you think there might be a push to have less and less people?
Definitely. I mean, that would definitely solve the problem of man being its own problem is to get rid of man.
Yeah. And, it's interesting when all these people, these elite groups talk about getting rid of humanity or only having, one or no kids. It's, for some strange reason, they're always exempt. And they're not the ones that are, if you think there should be less people, lead by example.
Yeah.
They're always exempt, though. It's always about you being the good serf and obeying the dictates of the New World Order, essentially, not them. So all this stuff could be very scary if applied to further using the green or the global warming as a means to create a one world order or a global dictatorship. Um, would you feel that's a legitimate fear to have?
That would be a definite legitimate fear to have. I think if we have this technology, which I mean, I'm pretty sure everybody can acknowledge that we do have this technology to do it. And like I said, it's scary to think that we can control that. And like I said, that the people behind it are not going to use it for the good of mankind. They're going to use it for their own good, which is not good for mankind.
Yep. It's the Morlocks and the Eloys. You ever see that time traveler or time machine movie?
No.
Basically what it is there's this guy and he's got a time machine. He goes way into the future and there was a catastrophe and some of the people, the elites, during this nuclear war went underground and built these underground cities, and then the rest of the poor slops stayed on the surface. And over time, the poor slops on the surface that survived basically devolved into this low-tech society, but they lived pretty well because the bottom people would come and feed them and leave food out for them and stuff. But there was a catch. The bottom people, the elites, kept their numbers almost like herds down to very limited numbers, and then they also ate them. They ate the people on the surface. And I like that analogy because I think elites think that almost like if you listen to some of the transhuman talks, they actually, like on TED, I hate TED, but they actually talk about how humanity might be diverging into two species. And when I hear talk like this, it makes me very frightened. They're starting to think that because they come from a privileged background, that they're, it's kind of like the bee theory. I'm on a rant. I'll let you talk in a sec. I'm sorry. It's kind of like bees. I think the difference between a drone and I forget a worker bee is the drone that breeds with the queen just gets a bunch more honey, and it's kind of like the same with elites. They start thinking that they're better than everyone else and this unique, almost emerging species because they get all the resources and your average person doesn't. And if they start thinking in those terms of us versus them and view us as using up all their precious resources, you can see that they might be incentivized to start doing covert action to, depopulate us, make it harder for us to breed, control us more, move us all into cities, leave the countryside, which they consider theirs. Pristine, you see that with the Hunger Games type books and a lot of other things where they're almost like pre-programming us to all accept that. Even go so far as to say promote homosexuality, because if you're, with two dudes, you're not going to have a kids, or at least not now, but then there's some genetic stuff that's coming out where maybe they can use egg precursors and you can have 4 dads instead of a mom and a dad. I don't know. It gets crazy. But anyway, I'm rambling. Go ahead and toss your comments in, and then we'll wrap up.
Well, from the beginning of time, this is like a reoccurring thing with the human species. Is people think that they're better than other people, and you see it with the Rome's siege of Jerusalem. You see it with the Crusades. You see it with the Nazis. You get a group of people that think that they are superior, that they are the chosen people, and that they think everybody else basically should be gone, and that's their mission, is to destroy this other group of people for whatever reason they think that they deem worthy to destroy them by. So I mean, it's the only thing different now is the technology and the amount of people and who all the people are who are not up to their certain standard. So I mean, it is scary to see this happening again, because again, history repeats itself, and it's just happening again. But now there's a lot more at stake because of the technology involved.
Very well said. I'm going to put you on the spot with another question here, but I'm going to preface it. On one of the videos I was watching about the Morgellons stuff, one guy said, he was talking about the possible defenses against all this stuff if it's real. But I found this one quote that he said very interesting. He said, "The only sure thing now is Ephesians 6:10 through 20, which is talking about the armor of God." Which brings us to, what do you think a Christian response to all this stuff should be? There's no wrong answer. I haven't thought it through at all. So go ahead and wing it and let's.
Obviously, as a human, as a worker bee, I would be very concerned in the short term here, because I don't want to be poisoned. I don't want my family to be poisoned. I don't want any of my friends or relatives to be poisoned. But in the long term, it doesn't really matter what happens on earth, what happens in this life, because as a Christian, I believe and I have faith and I have not just hope, but I have the assurance that because I've put my trust in Jesus Christ, and I don't trust men, I don't trust myself, I trust in Jesus, that he saved me from my sins, that no matter what happens, I get to spend eternity in heaven with him in his presence. And so really, what can men do to me? How can they hurt me? I mean, yeah, they can take my life, but really all that does is get me to God that much quicker. And obviously I don't want to go that much quicker, but I don't have to fear it. I have no fear in death because of my assurance that because of what Jesus did on the cross, because he died for my sins, and because I put my faith in that I'm saved. And that's all there is to it.
Now, how does one become a Christian?
One becomes a Christian by, one, acknowledging that you are a sinful person, that not only are we born with sin, but I know anybody out there listening would have to admit that they've done bad things in their life. They have not met God's perfect standard and his perfect law. We've all broken it, not only the Ten Commandments, which I'm sure everybody has seen or know what they are, but I mean, just even thinking lustful thoughts about somebody, or thinking bad thoughts about somebody, or anything like that, you've broken God's perfect standard. And because of that, you deserve eternal separation from him. He cannot allow sin into heaven. And so because of our fall, because of our sin, he had to make a payment for that, and that payment was Jesus Christ coming to earth and dying on the cross. And by accepting it, by admitting that you are a sinner, and by accepting that Jesus Christ not only died, but he rose again and paid that price for you, and that because of that, you do not have to pay the price. You are saved from it. You are taken out, and Jesus takes your place. He paid that price, so you don't have to. And by accepting Jesus Christ, you are able to say you are a Christian. You are able to live with a right life. You are reunited with God. You don't have that broken relationship anymore. You're healed.
Well said. Bible talks about becoming born again, and when you accept Jesus as your Savior and put your faith that he died on the cross for your sins and rose again, according to Romans 10:9, if you confess with your mouth the Lord Jesus and believe in your heart that God rose him from the dead, you shall be saved. And there's other verses that back that up. So Michigan Bob and myself highly encourage you in these dangerous times to not put off getting right with God if you're not right with God, if you've never made that commitment to put your faith in Jesus as God's only provision for your sin. And so, as times become more perilous, as things like, what we talked about tonight, I think more of this type of stuff will come out in the open, and there'll be worse things coming. That not to use the fear tactic, but again, life's not, don't put off that getting right with God, because you really don't know how much longer you have on this earth. And plus, I also think that it's the time where God's looking for heroes, and it's a time where, if this really is where history's wrapping up, God's looking for people that he can use to reach out to other people and do mighty things. So you could be that person. So don't put it off. Any last comments there, Michigan Bob?
I think that pretty much wraps it up.
All right. Well, I know we kind of talked about some fringe stuff, but I think Michigan Bob and myself have looked at the evidence, and we both believe that HAARP can do weather control, that chemtrails are happening, and that the possibility that there is this behind-the-scenes elite group that are using these technologies to promote global warming. Would you concur with that, Michigan Bob?
I would definitely concur.
All right. I think I flogged it to death, but just throwing it out there again. So thank you, everyone, for listening. Topic for next week. What do you think, Michigan Bob? Should we finally do Common Core? Should we do fusion centers, or you got any requests you want to cover?
No requests from me. Whatever you feel like leading the ship to.
Okay. I'll try to do Common Core, but for some reason I'm just dragging my feet on that one. So maybe we'll see how well I do. I'll use fusion centers as a backup. So thanks again for listening to us rant. You can find the notes. Just go to radioinfoside.com. The website's still being worked on, but by the end of the week, all the notes and all the shows should be archived up there. So hope you have a good Labor Day. Any final word, Michigan Bob, before I pull the plug?
Again, don't wait to put your trust in Jesus, because now is the time.
Amen. Thanks for listening. Good night, everyone.